All right, good. Thank you.
It's
All
being
right.
recorded.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir. As you can see, we're dedicated professionals, but not in Zoom.
Right.
And we are doing things different this year. We're doing things virtually. Our public programs, as well as Mosaic. This is our 8th year of recruiting teens, grades 8 through 12. The applications happen to be due tomorrow, but I'm sure the leaders will have mercy if you're a day or so late with your application. The kickoff session is scheduled for 10:18, and we have been we'll be keeping the meetings on Zoom to 1 hour and include breakout rooms so that students will have time with one another. Mosaic stands for mobilizing our students for action to build interfaith community. It's been our multi-faith project where we visit other houses of worship and learn about other faiths, as well as work together in community service projects. We learn more and more about this exciting endeavor. For more information, you go to our website, www.interfaithmamacenter.org or gardenstatemosaic.org. Our speakers today are Minister Kerwin Webb and Jada Tulloch. Joe Ritaka, our program chair and most capable Shanti leader, will introduce Kerwin, and Georgette will introduce Jada. I thank Joe, the Shanti team, and the board for working to make this all happen. A few things about questions and answers. Time for that will follow. A few things. This program is being recorded and will be placed on our website. If you wish to remain anonymous, simply stay on mute and turn off your video. You will be muted and you'll need to unmute yourself when you are recognized and wish to speak during the Q&A. During the talks, we suggest you select speaker view and turn off your video. When it is time for Q&A, you may ask questions using the chat box or by raising your Zoom hand. Both can be found at the top of the screen. On my screen, I have to go to participants, and then it falls down to chat, and then it goes to the bottom, and you'll see a blue hand. We're so grateful for the endowment from the Chadha family. The annual Shanti Peace events were instituted in 1996 by Roshan and Ellen Chadha and Bhushan and Subhush Chadha, with a dedicated endowment fund in honor of their parents, Sri Ram and Shanti Chadha. The main purpose of the Shanti lecture is to provide greater information about South Asian religions and other lesser known religions in the United States, and to foster interfaith dialogue. The emphasis has broadened to include the advancement of peace and religious freedom. Today will be about systemic racism and what we can do about it. Roshan was one of the founders of the Mama Center, has been a faithful leader who is now living in Virginia, but continues to offer his wisdom and support. He was one of the founders and has provided years of leadership and a kind heart to us all. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Roshan. Okay, Roshan.
Gotta unmute myself first. Okay.
Good afternoon. I thank you, Liz, for your kind introduction. Dear friends and honored guests, on behalf of my brother Shashi or Bhushan, his wife, my sister-in-law Subhash, and my wife Helen, I welcome you to the 21st Shanti Peace Lecture. A number of the Chada young people from all over the globe may be on this dialogue. Please permit me to send my love to them. Minister Kerwin and Jada, this lecture series began in honor of our parents, Sri Ram and Shanti Chada. My mother's name, Shanti, means peace. Hence the name Shanti Lecture. They and their ancestors followed the Hindu wisdom tradition. My father was a very ecumenical person, and my mother, Shanti, was a devotee of Lord Krishna. To the Hindu tradition, truth and peace, Shanti, are central to their value system. Shanti, namely peace, comes to us in two ways: internal personal peace and world peace. They lived those values and found courage, resilience, and integrity in their lives, and showed us all how to live that way. They included non-sentient beings in their prayers. Mahatma Gandhi, whose birthday was celebrated yesterday, showed them and my generation how to accept diversity with grace, with peace, and with nonviolence. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. carried that message to America on nonviolence, of hope in his life. So here we are today in another generation, looking for hope, inclusivity, justice, and love. Minister Kerwin and Jada, you honor my parents and us all here by speaking today in search of hope and justice. We welcome you with our love. Roshan.
Roshan, thank you for setting the right spirit and tone for today. So good afternoon. My name is Joe Rotacco. As we are breaking the Shanti tradition in a number of ways today, we usually have one speaker, but we're going to have two. We want to acknowledge the importance of youth, not as part of our unpredictable future, but as important to shaping our now and our what next. And this is especially important relative to the long-standing and pressing issue of racial injustice in the United States. A fundamentally important aspect of the Monmouth Center is to create a more harmonious world that embraces differences among people. We work towards this objective in many ways. In particular, our public events are meant to educate, raise awareness, and provide motivation. Motivation for you to learn more on your own and look for ways that work for you to take some constructive action. So today, after two brief presentations, there will be ample time for you to join the conversation. At that time, I will review again the procedures for raising your hand. It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Minister Kerwin Webb. In recent months, many of us from the Monmouth Center of World Religions and Ethical Thought Board, that's MCWRET, for those who are not familiar, had the pleasure of listening to Zoom presentations by Kerwin. We were impressed not only with his message, but his engaging style. For this year's Shanti, as usual, we have a handful of excellent candidates to consider, but Kerwin was clearly our consensus choice. We are pleased that he has accepted our invitation to speak. A little bit about Kerwin. Minister Kerwin Webb serves as the Associate Pastor of Youth and Young Adults at Second Baptist Church of Asbury Park. He's also the president of the Greater Red Bank Area NAACP. His passions include education, mentoring, training, and community development. The list of organizations that he is part of or has been part of are too numerous to list. I will highlight only one, the RMW Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to feed, educate, and empower. I love that. Kerwin's bio pretty much concludes with the following aspiration. My desired outcome is that my work with individuals, churches, and community organizations will help lead to dramatic transformation and change within both individuals and communities. Let today be one more of those opportunities for Kerwin. So Kerwin, you may speak.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. It is my great privilege to present at this event. And it is my hope that at the end of our talk and our question and answer time, that that minds are expanded and that a new understanding of some of the ways that racism affects people can be brought light on, so that we all can do a little bit better at trying to curb the problems of systemic racism. The reason that I chose the topic, the silent sting of systemic racism, is that it is not that America or even the institutions that we have now are overtly racist in their actions or practices. It is not that the people in these organizations or institutions are racist, but my premise is that in the beginning of the creation of this country and a lot of our institutions, those ideologies and mindsets that were prevalent during that time were built into the systems and the structures that we have. And over time, while there have been modest reforms and changes in some of the outright oppressive nature of things, the deep work of really undoing the systems and the structures, I think, have not been done. And so therefore, systemic racism perpetuates itself generation after generation. As an associate pastor, as a nonprofit leader, as an NAACP worker, it is difficult for me to understand how racism continues to be so debilitating to our nation. I remember being in 9th grade Alabama history class and learning just about some of the injustices that happened, some of the things that Black people, African Americans experienced in this country. And I was hopeful at that time because our instructors, our teachers were saying things have changed. We've gotten better. And no doubt, things have definitely gotten better since the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But there are some ways and in some places where it may have gotten worse. So as I grew and I continued to live, gotten involved with the organizations that I've been a part of, I started to see some trends and some patterns in them. And that is kind of what I want to talk about in the effort to highlight how the silence of racist systems can really impact people today. I graduated from Alabama State University in 2004 with a bachelor's in business administration and went into the corporate world, and I was relatively successful in my positions and my pursuits. I was able to help our company grow. I was able to help train and develop people. But then at a certain level, there seemed to be a ceiling. I remember I was working in Houston, Texas, and I got transferred. I was offered a transfer to go back to Alabama to help open one of our locations in Alabama. And I had gone to school in Montgomery, Alabama, so the job was in Montgomery, and it was sort of a homecoming for me. I would be closer to my family. I was able to go back to a place where I spent some years in undergrad, and I was in the lead position at our organization. And over time, our team grew, it developed, and in our company, our new site was doing very well. It was making numbers that were exceeding expectations. Our team was growing. And then reality set in. The people in the area, the clients that we served, when they would come in, the attitude that they had towards me was, there's no way you could be the manager. There's no way that you're in charge. And so if there was a question that came up and I gave them a response that they didn't like, they found the closest white associate and went to them and asked them, was it true? And then that associate replied and said, well, he's the manager, so you have to ask him. And instead of coming back to ask or whatever, they got frustrated and just left and said, I can't believe this. If that happened only one time, it would have been okay. But over my career there, I spent like 2 years there. It happened more and more frequently. And I didn't allow it to disturb me because I understood the setting and the situation that I was in. The difficult part for me with that organization is that after 7 years with them, I had a supervisor who was white, that we had disagreements about process. And while he was an authority over me, I felt that this is the best way to do these things. This is why you brought me here, to give you my honest opinion. Well, for a number of reasons, but this did not end well for me because I was pushing against the grain. I was going against a system that said, I'm the manager, do what I say, and don't give pushback. While at the time I was disappointed and it hurt, that ended up launching me on the trajectory that I'm on, to where I became a servant, right? I started working with nonprofits, I started volunteering, and that's when God helped me to really understand that my focus and my purpose was at people, helping to grow and develop people. So after that, I ended up coming to New Jersey, working for Habitat for Humanity, and it was a great experience, helping homeowners right after Hurricane Sandy to get back into their homes. And that year, I was a volunteer with the AmeriCorps program. That year was great. When I started working with the local Habitat affiliate, that's when some of those same things started to surface again. And I understand it, right? This nonprofit was doing major work and dealing in major dollars. And here I am, I think I was late 20s. And in those meetings, I could tell that even though people were hearing what I was saying, it was sort of a dismissive attitude towards the things that I was bringing. I'd like to say it was because I was young, but my resume and my experience said that I belonged at those tables. My voice and my value that I added was helpful. Yet some people could not see beyond this. I could go on, and there were similar things at Princeton Seminary. There were similar things at another employer that I worked with. And so over time, I came to realize that it is not the people necessarily. While there are some people who are racist and really do not believe that someone like me belongs in a boardroom or in a board meeting, really what I found as I look back was it was the systems that were in place. That if you challenge the person that is in authority, that system is designed to eliminate this challenge instead of expanding and growing, because it was difficult, right? If you're used to doing things a certain way, and then you have this person coming in with a different mindset, a different thought process, it's generally easier to dismiss that person as opposed to looking at what is being said and how this might be beneficial. So it was that combination of wanting to maintain the status quo, and in probably some ways, deep-seated prejudices that have been ingrained over time. Not anything, not anything that is outright against me, but the system allowed this person to say we would rather get rid of him than to hear what he's saying. As the NAACP president, it's part of my job to help people to see things that they don't want to see, to help people to understand the ways that their actions and their behaviors impact others. And those conversations are not always nice or easy. One of the recent events that I was on, we were speaking about how New Jersey in particular, but the North in general, seems to have come away from the racist history of the country relatively unscathed, where people believe that most of the racist things happened in the South and that we were more advanced in the North and we didn't do those things. And while it might have been more explicit down South, it was, I believe, more sinister up North because of the way that it was administered. In that talk, I talked about how Princeton Seminary in 2018, my last full year there, undertook their historical audit on slavery to examine the seminary's ties with American chattel slavery and the American Colonization Society, and how some of the leading theological thinkers and scholars of the day had these contradictory views that everyone were made in the image of God and God made everyone equal, but at the same time, Black people could not take care of themselves, so they needed to be subservient to whites. I don't believe many people hold those views today, not at all, not in the least. But what I do believe is that a lot of people have bought into the fact that because the laws have changed, because times have changed and the hardcore racists have largely died out, that things are better. Yes, they're better relatively, but the systems that were created to govern us, the systems that were created to help us to grow and thrive have been maintained. Think about it, educationally, students who don't perform to a standard that is basically the standard that was established as a white standard, right? For education or articulation or understanding. If you don't meet that standard, then you are deemed less than. You are classified as not able to achieve. And that may not necessarily be true. Because ultimately what that is saying is that culturally you have to assimilate to our way of thinking and being for you to be acceptable. You have to take off all tracings of the way that you speak and your understandings to fit it into this narrow box of our understanding. And that is not anybody's intent, I think, but based on how K through 12 education is done, that's what it says. That's what it says about us. If we don't meet this standard, we are deficient. Now, think about the psychological effect that that could have on a child. If you are doing well in your setting, in your context, in your culture, but then you go to get approval from an institution, and this institution says, no, this doesn't cut it. I'll give you an example from seminary. My last year, I had a few preaching classes. One was preaching in the African-American tradition, and one was preaching suffering and hope. One instructor was an African-American instructor, the other one was a white instructor. And I know that my white instructor was not racist, and she did not have anything out against me. She was helping us to sharpen our craft and be better at what we were doing. But in the grading, her standard was not the standard that I preach in. My denomination, I'm a Baptist preacher, and that is different from a Presbyterian preacher. And so when grading, I got a lower grade in her class than in preaching in the African-American tradition, largely because the expectation from my white instructor was different than what is natural and normal in my context, in my setting. And so I use those examples not to jab at these institutions or these individuals, but just to say that we, those who are really working and serious to do this anti-racist work or to bring about peace and justice and equity, we have to look beyond the surface and really start attacking the things, the ideologies that our systems were built on. It's the same in the corporate or the work environment where certain practices aren't allowed. Let's think about the hair, right? There have been several places where if you wear a certain hairstyle, that is an offense that you can be written up for, whereas others don't have that same stigma. And so we have to look at these and not say, hey, manager who is upholding this policy, you are bad or wrong, but saying, how can we, if we're really trying to be more equitable and just, how can we really evaluate what our operating procedures so that we can change the effect? I really believe that America is a great melting pot. I really believe that the majority of Americans, the majority of the people that live in this country are good individuals who want to bring about peace, justice, and equity. I also believe that we've bought into the narrative that the way that things are now is even across the board, and that there's no more that needs to be done. Just those people who are on the underside have to work harder. I would challenge us all to really go beyond that and understand most of our systems were created in a time where people that look like me, people that look like Jada, were considered not human. And so therefore to say now that we consider you human, but you still have to reach our standard without taking into context some of the barriers that are in front of us, then we aren't giving people a fair shot. On the other hand, there are people in our country who still have those racist beliefs and ideologies and are trying to perpetuate them. They're trying to sow division. They're trying to sow hatred. What that leaves for us to do, that leaves us with a great burden and a great responsibility. Our churches, our nonprofits, our other organizations, our educational institutions, we all have to really, really work hard to listen to those who are traditionally not listened to. And this is not just saying blindly accept everything they say, but really give them a fair hearing as though they were someone who came in with the perfect pedigree. And I think what most people will find, and what people in the institutions and organizations that I've been in, what they have found, is when they give a fair hearing to things, they learn where the blind spots are, and they learn how to be more productive. Because if you have multiple people looking at the same thing, you get a more complete understanding of what you're looking at. And so closing out people because they are younger, or because they don't come from the right background, or because they aren't in the in crowd, closing them out closes out the possibility of greater success and future development. So I just want to thank you all for listening. Thank you all for your attention. And I'm looking forward to the question and answer session in case I can help flesh out some of the things that I was saying. But I just want to leave you with this one thing. A lot of what we are hoping, a lot of what our systems are designed to do is to have everyone to assimilate into one thought pattern, one thought practice. This is what I'll say. Assimilation kills culture, which also kills creativity. If we want to continue to thrive and grow, we have to embrace the difference. We have to learn from the different cultures so that we can all thrive and grow together and build something better together. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Kerwin. Right, amen. I want to express appreciation for one thing about Kerwin that I'm beginning to fully appreciate, is the disappointments that you have suffered have not turned you into a bitter or cynical person. Rather, you have tried to understand. And through that understanding, take that understanding and share it with others so that more can understand. So thank you. That's kind of what we're all about. So we're with you. So thank you. So Georgette, a fellow Mama Center and World Religion and Ethical Thought board member who this year doesn't have to cook at the Shanti lecture, but can actually enjoy it. I will ask Georgette to introduce our next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Georgette Thomas, and I had the pleasure to be introduced to Jada Tulloch, and back in June, she spoke at a rally that was for Middletown High School North and Middletown High School South. I was very excited about it because I am one of the first graduates of Middletown High School South, class of '77. And when I actually heard that Jada was the valedictorian for Middletown's 2020 graduation, it really warmed my heart, and especially in the light of what we're all dealing with. So without further ado, Jada graduated from Middletown High School North 2020, valedictorian, and she now is a student at NYU. She's very, very busy. So we have gotten together to make sure that this has happened, and the next voice you hear will be that of Jada Tulloch.
Hi everyone, I'm Jada. And thank you so much, Georgette, and sorry, my brother's making noise in the background. And Minister Webb for sharing your experiences and everything. I just wanted to say thank you again for you guys to kind of like be willing to hear my perspective as a young person. I'm a freshman in college. I actually go to Columbia, but it's also in New York. But yeah, so I think in like the past few months with kind of being able to speak out about some of the injustices that I've seen or experienced in my own town, I've had the opportunity to talk to so many other people who have had similar experiences from so many different identities. And the most important thing I learned is how valuable it is to listen to others and really connect with others and not use these differences to separate each other or create some divide, but to unite each other and just understand the value in human connection, really. Growing up, my mom, both of my parents are from the Caribbean, and my mom, her family, I have aunts who are like Hindu, and then the aunts from the same family are also Muslim. And I grew up like in a Catholic town. And so, I've always been exposed to different faiths or different, religious beliefs. But there's all the same kind of general thought or message in those religious institutions. And it's just that, we need to have peace and acceptance and just respect one another. That's the most important thing. So in listening to others and communicating with others, we also have to respect each other. And, it's such like a beautiful thing that even like though we're all here virtually, we all come from different backgrounds and we're able to learn from each other, and whether that the differences be in our race or ethnicity or religion or age, it's really important to just kind of have that understanding. And so my perspective as a young person is that I feel like although it's very discouraging, the kind of climate of our country right now, this is a great opportunity for young people and the older generations who have experienced some similar things in a different kind of aspect to come together and move forward and use the shared experiences of, as Minister Webb spoke about, systemic racism and all the systems that have been built upon these faulty methods of thought, kind of using that to come together and basically have a better future for the future generations. So it's more rooted in inclusivity and celebrating diversity. And so over the summer, I was able to talk to other students, high school students or recent graduates, and we worked together on kind of establishing a new curriculum for the high school students and offering new classes and more history classes that aren't so Eurocentric, or just to kind of open up that thought. Because although these conversations that we're having, whether it be inside or outside of the classroom, are uncomfortable, they're very much needed. And we have to teach kids starting from kindergarten all the way through high school how important it is to acknowledge each other's differences, because there is an element of like, I don't see color that a lot of people have been kind of putting forward and thinking that's okay, good, I'm not racist, I don't see color. But that's an issue, because we can't be colorblind. We have to acknowledge each other's differences, we have to acknowledge each other's privileges, disparities, and we need to kind of see people for who they are and not water them down to something that is more palatable to us. Like I've heard people have said to me like, oh, like I totally support you, thank you for speaking out, I don't see color. And that last bit really doesn't sit right with me, because I'm a Black woman and I'm not ashamed of that. I don't want to be any less who I am, and I also don't want to go out into the world and have other people feel like they can't have that pride in their background as well. So I think that's a really big thing that I want to bring into the schools, because even though, thinking about the way that I grew up learning about Thanksgiving or the civil rights movement, it's like people who came in Thanksgiving and interacted with the Native Americans, that wasn't just like a nice dinner, there was an element of violence, and it's not as, we have to stop sugarcoating history, basically, especially with younger kids. And it's not necessarily that we have to be so graphic and kind of give all the details, but we do have to teach young people about the disparities that have existed since the beginning of time and how to not use that to separate or to kind of have any, be any less accepting of each other. And a big thing too is that the racism and bigotry that plagues our society and, you know, the institutions that our society is built on, it's not inherent, it's taught, and it's perpetuated through years of neglecting the issues. And, you know, that's why it's so important to talk about these issues and not just continue the cycle of someone speaking out and then being silenced. And that's where the listening comes in. So, you know, I mean, over the past few months too, in speaking out, there has been quite a bit of backlash, and, you know, that's inevitable. It is a difficult concept because in me or any other person of color or anyone from a minority group, whether that be with religion or, you know, any type of identity, in us kind of asking to be acknowledged or asking for, you know, respect, others may feel like they're losing their privilege. And then that's why there develops some kind of animosity. But the reality of it is, me wanting rights isn't taking rights away from someone else. And once people listen to each other and kind of focus on human empathy and understand that, you know, there's like a little metaphor about it, and it's like, rights aren't pie. You know, I'm not taking a slice of pie and leaving less for someone else. It's everyone needs rights. Everyone deserves to be respected. And although it's difficult to kind of get that through to some people, it doesn't mean we should be discouraged in kind of fighting for that, I guess. So yeah, I mean, and another thing is that it is very overwhelming. It's discouraging, the reality that we live in, and it's important to have community programs like this to uplift people and uplift the youth and kind of remind people that there is good in the world and there is a reason to keep advocating for these changes. And, you know, the world isn't going to change overnight, but it's important to have this local reform and these community-based discussions, because that's how you build up and tackle the higher injustices and issues that, you know, plague our country and in the society and the world. And so it's important to just have that in mind and have these little conversations, from in your home to in the classroom to in the workspace to in whatever, you know, program that you're in, whatever environment that you're in, because that's how you accomplish this greater change. So yeah, I really just hope you guys kind of understand how important it is to see color and to celebrate people for their differences. And one more thing to add, I'm currently in a history of health inequality in the modern United States and racism class, and so we're talking about racism and how it's ingrained into medicine, in economics, and education. And every day that I have class and I get to talk to other students, it's always more eye-opening. And it's actually the class I have in college now it's my first Black teacher ever. Like, I've never had a Black teacher. So with that, you know, representation is very important too. So I loved seeing everyone come on the Zoom and like seeing different people of different ages and backgrounds coming on, because, you know, even though we're different, you know, there's that representation. It's important to kind of be seen and be proud of being seen and be proud of interacting with other people. So yeah, I think it's just about time that people feel comfortable for embracing who they are and what they represent. And, you know, everyone has a right to exist, and we all deserve to feel safe in doing so. So I hope that resonates with some of you, and thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Jada. So I would say Jada's message is very consistent with really what the Monmouth Center is all about. Don't deny difference. Accept difference. Respect difference. Value difference. Appreciate difference. And as Kerwin emphasized, you will be rewarded because you will learn things that the narrow perspective might not have provided. So the more voices, the closer to truth we get. So thank you. So it's now time for everyone else to join the conversation. So I'm going to provide a few guidelines. First and most important, please be brief. Please ask only one question or raise one issue at a time. Time permitting, we will get back to you after everybody else has had a chance. If you feel particularly passionate about an issue, before speaking, take a deep breath, slow yourself down, and think about how to express yourself with interest, caring, and a dose of humility. This is a lesson that many of us have learned, sometimes the hard way. It's not easy, but you get better at it as you try. This is also helpful not only in, I'll say, interfaith issues or controversial issues, even in your own house, practice these thoughts, okay? And as we have two speakers today, if you have a question, please let me know if you want to address it to one or the other, or both. We grant permission to our speakers to choose not to address a question. They don't have to explain why. They can just say, I choose to pass on that question today, just so we don't go somewhere we don't want to go. Lastly, we are legally a nonpartisan, apolitical organization, so we are obliged to stay away from politics, partisan politics, politicians. So please, if you choose to participate, do not mention any names of politicians or parties. And we may choose to ignore that input as well, okay? So here's the procedure. We suggest that you use the Zoom chat feature, which is typically on the bottom of your screen. Click on that, type your question or your input. Liz Congdon, one of the moderators who did the introduction today, will moderate that. She will read the chat. And again, if she sees it as inappropriate, she will ignore the chat. After we're done with the chats, we will move to the Zoom raise hand feature. That's the little blue hand. If you click on participants, click on the hand, and Ari Jane, one of our other co-moderators for today, will recognize you and unmute you, or you will unmute yourself, and then you will have your opportunity to speak. If we still have time after that, we will try the old physical raising of the hands, and we'll get to that later. And please bear in mind, we're still learning how to be good Zoom hosts, so we're trying. And Ari will provide us with a warning at 4:45. So we have almost an hour for dialogue, which I think is great. So send your chats off to Liz, and Liz will take over for now. So Liz, unmute and show yourself.
I have the first question. Jada, could you give us an example of the kind of racism you experienced in Middletown, New Jersey? What was the nature of the pushback you received after your valedictorian speech? And the question is from Stevie Lishan, co-president.
Okay, thank you, Stevie, for your question. So a lot of, because of like quarantine and stuff, and I haven't been like around people, a lot of the backlash has been on Facebook. So there were a few there were quite a few comments, and I remember one that stuck out to me was a parent of someone at the school that I used to go to said that me being a Black person who spoke out about racism, all Black people who speak out are ugly animals, and that was just very, it's crazy that people actually put that stuff online and say stuff like that. So, and there are people who supported it and liked the comment, and that was just one of the many. But yeah, even growing up, I've had some experiences with classmates. I remember on the at the rally that we had in June, I spoke about an experience that I had where a student had said that no one should talk to me or come close to me because I was Black, so that meant I was from Africa and I had AIDS and I was going to give people AIDS. So it's little things like that. I mean, those aren't necessarily microaggressions because those are genuinely racist comments, but those are a few examples of things that I've experienced. Not saying that I, have to validate my speaking out about racism by giving specific examples, but those are a few of the things that I have in mind, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you, Jada. Question from Carolyn. Kerwin, how should we approach people who we believe are acting perhaps subtly racist? What should we do in those conversations?
Thank you for the question, and it's a really good one. I tend to ask people questions to try to get at some of their understanding or their thinking behind what they're doing. And so if there's something that just strikes me the wrong way, I'll say, okay, well, can you help me understand why'd you ask that question? And then would you ask that if this person were not a minority or not a Black person? And just really trying to help them, because a lot of times, and I really believe this, a lot of times people don't know that some of their behaviors or some of their thoughts are racist or can be perceived as racist. Because even if we're not intending to say something in a racist way, depending on the person who's hearing it and their experiences, they could take it, they could perceive it that way because of social conditioning. And so if we do encounter that, if we do feel or hear something that's a little bit questionable, I wouldn't say attack that person, but just try to understand what is the source. Where did you hear that from? And then try to get them to explain it. And in that explanation process, what I've found is some people, in trying to explain what they're saying or where they come from with it, they realize that, hey, maybe I'm wrong, right? This opinion that I have of this Black person came from a white person, right? And so helping them to understand and learn, because that'll do two things. That will help them to see that, okay, this person is safe for me to ask questions to, but also it lets them feel like, okay, I'm trying and I'm not being attacked for getting it wrong. Sometimes people who are trying to do the right thing, they're attacked if they say the wrong thing and don't know it. And so they need somebody to help them navigate that way. And so in the conversations and things that I have, the appearances that I make, I'll say when I'm speaking to predominantly white groups, hey, if you are trying to, reach out and say things, let me be the Black person that you mess up with, because I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to demean you. I'm going to help you understand how this could be taken from somebody else. So I would say, to answer the question in summation, is ask them questions to try to get to the root of where it comes from.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is from Calvin, and he is also a board member at the Moms Center. Jada, what % of your class were minority? What % were Black?
I have no idea, but it's not like, I have no idea. Yeah. I know it's like, obviously there's a majority of people who aren't minorities, but I'm not sure the exact percent.
Okay, thank you. This question is from Joanne. Thank you, Jada. I love that you're discovering Black teachers. Hopefully more now than in '69 when I graduated from college. But we had just instituted Black studies. So much more is still needed. Yes, thank you. That's a great addition. And from Helen, we have a question, and it's to both of you. What most identifies being Black? Is it just color? There are so many shades of skin. My Black friend is very dark and is 60% Irish. I am very white with a small percent of sub-Saharan DNA. Is it only color? Is it economic? Is it culture? Is it life experience? Is it linguistic? Is color the most obvious or not?
I will let Jada attempt to answer first if she liked, because I talk a lot.
Okay, so yeah, I guess this question really brings up an important point of like the misconception of like what defines Blackness, right? Because you know, I've gotten a lot of comments that are like, oh, you don't talk Black, like you don't sound Black. And then from there I ask the person, well, what is Black? What do you think Black is? And you know, it's not just color, and it's not just how you talk or, you know, where you're from, but if, you know, part of it is like, okay, yeah, the percentage of whatever, but it's also not that technical. Like, I think if you're Black, that's your identity, and it's not like, it's not limited to just how you look or where you're from. And it's not economic. It's a mixture of culture, and it's a mixture of, you know, your actual like ethnicity or like, but it's a complicated question because, you know, as much as like you can, it's as much as there is it's a gray area of like Black and white, I guess, because, you know, it's not just, I feel like if someone says like I'm Black and other people who perceive them don't have the right to kind of deny that, as with every other identity, but it is complicated. I'll let Kerwin take the rest of it because this is a good question, but go ahead.
Thanks for taking a stab at it, Jada. Part of why I let you go first was because it is so complicated. But I think in the context of the conversation we're having here in America, the difference is just color. It is basically a color thing. And to go along with what Jada was saying about the complications of what is Black, there are people from African countries that wouldn't identify themselves as Black. There are people from Caribbean nations that wouldn't identify themselves as Black. I remember when we were at the seminary working to try to define or figure out suggestions for the seminary to adopt as far as reparations, we had debates amongst ourselves about who would be included in these or not. But as far as structural or systemic racism, I think most of that is just based on what someone looks like. A cop pulling somebody over, one person over versus the other. It has nothing to do with your heritage or your ethnicity or economic status. It is just you look like this type of person. Now, once it's been so deeply ingrained, it does start to trickle down into all of those other things, economics and culture and linguistics. Because I too have had people say, you don't sound Black. Your name doesn't even sound Black. Okay, what does a Black name sound like, right? And then they'll go and give one of those names that is you know. So to answer the question, Black, for what most people I think in America would define, it is simply color. But if you really want to get to the root of what Black is, that's a real, that's like a doctoral thesis right there.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Esmet, another board member, Reverend Kerwin. She's asking about institutional racism. How do you handle and address the grand jury not indicting any of the officers who killed Breonna Taylor? This is a repeated institutional behavior.
Yes. Two things off the top of my head that I will say. We have to really attack it from two different points of view. We know that things like this continue to happen. And so the only way to really combat it is to make sure that more people, that the jury pool or the grand jury pool becomes a more diverse institution, right? We have to make sure that more people are registered to vote and more people participate who are less likely to be there now. I think it would have been hard. I don't know the makeup of the grand jury. I really did not pay a whole lot of attention to the case because it is draining, right? But I find it hard to believe that you can have a jury of 12 people, and if you had 3 or 4 Black people on there, you would not have had that same type of outcome. I think it would have been more difficult to say that, but when you have the absence of people who look like Breonna Taylor on the jury pool, it's easier to come away with that, even if the DA looks like us. The other side is the legal way, legally, and really trying to figure out how is it that someone did lose a life, but no one is charged in the death, even accidental, right? And so I know there are, they've released the transcripts because all of the available charges weren't presented to the grand jury. So you have to attack it from the structural part, legally, like what is right and fair, but also we have to make sure that more people who are diverse in thought and ideologies are inside of those rooms so that they can bring the other side to bear.
Thank you. And now a question from Peggy for Jada. Thanks for a deepening insight. I'm often stumped by those who say, I do not see color. I see more clearly now what a loss it is for them to shut you out or down. They will miss completely the creativity of our different insights and enculturation. Thank you, Peggy. And it's an answer from Judy Stevens. Middletown North has less than 4% Black students, less than 15% minority overall, I think. I retired from there a year ago and may not remember precisely. Sounds pretty precise to me. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Sarmeet asked, I would like to suggest that Blackness is a stereotype in our minds.
Can I add something to that? It's interesting that you use the word stereotype because I feel like that's definitely something like in American culture, especially because of the way the media portrays Black people, and the kind of like way that diversity in Blackness isn't represented like on TV or in movies and stuff. I don't necessarily, like, this is just my opinion, but I don't necessarily think it's limited to just being a stereotype in our minds, but I think the way that we are kind of introduced to Blackness in the way that we grow up or the way that we live, our perception of Blackness, depending on, you know, where we come from or who we interact with, that's what kind of makes you think of it in a certain way. Because someone who, I knew someone who like had never seen a Black person before, and initial reaction was to be scared of them. And that was really like mind-blowing for me, but also eye-opening in the sense that like a lot of how we perceive other people, not just Black people, but like anyone from any, you know, identity, it's dependent on culture and media, and how we have to kind of separate ourselves from that, even though it's always so in our faces, to kind of get a deeper understanding of how a person identifies and who they are.
Thank you. And a question from Balwinda. I think the answer might be different depending on who you ask. If there are two people, one is non-Black and the other perceiver of the other is white. The perceiver may attribute any it attributes to the other. I have been perceived as Jewish, Caribbean, South African, Native, etc. Okay. Vishwali asks, how do we as people of color encourage our kinfolk to become more involved in breaking down those barriers of systemic racism, including encouraging them to get out and vote? Good question.
I think I have an interesting perspective on this because half of my family is like, we're Caribbean, but like they're South Asian. So a lot of my aunts on my mom's side are like Indian, and there's definitely, I remember like growing up, there was a lot of issues with colorism, and that's not just like against Black people, but also about against like darker skinned South Asians. And that's something that I think kind of perpetuates the stigmas that exist. And, you know, we don't really think about the racism ingrained into like beauty and like the standards of beauty. And I think as other people of color, definitely just encouraging people to appreciate their physical differences, like whether that be your hair or like the tone of your skin in terms of colorism is really important. And I can't speak on this too much, but I did watch like something about the way that like the way that communities of color sometimes don't feel inclined to go out and vote because, like, depending on the background, like say like immigrant parents might not, you know, have that understanding or like connection to United States politics, I guess. So like that's where there is a disconnect. But I think like whether it be talking to your relatives or like friends or having like younger people like children and like students encouraging their parents to go out and vote, I think that's important because there's a lot of disconnect in like different communities of color, even though, you know, being people of color is what unites us. But in terms of politics, and like voting, there's definitely like a lack of representation of people of color in like the government. So I feel like that's where people don't feel like they're being represented, so their vote doesn't matter, but it does, I guess. I don't know if that like helps in any way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say that it's helpful to be mindful that people of color, Black people who we would encourage to help start to break down these barriers, many of them are in a mindset of survival mode. I just have to survive. I just have to make sure that my family survives. And so while it is a great ask or a great ideal to say, how can we get more people involved in that? We have to understand that for some people, just waking up, going to work and making it home safely That's a chore, right? And so helping them to see how this extra effort that goes on top of just trying to live in a racist society, right? Helping them to go beyond that. We have to be able to connect them and help them to see how this thing that you're asking me to do, how showing up at this protest, how showing up at this march, how voting in this election, how does this really affect my lived experience? I know a lot of people who don't vote because they say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which person wins. I'm still at the bottom of society and nobody cares about me, which time and time again, elections really prove that to be true. So to actually get people involved in breaking down these barriers, we have to make it easier for them to do so. For example, if you say, hey, we want you to come in and let us know how we can help to do this thing that we all agree needs to be done, right? And then this person of color, this black person comes in and say, well, you need to do this and this and this. And your first response is, no, we can't do that, because then it doesn't work, right? So we have to actually be willing to listen empathetically. We have to be willing to ally and partner. And another term that some of my seminary friends say, we need accomplices. We don't need people just to be allies with us and say, I support your cause. We need you to be out front and do the thing that will normally get us hurt, right? The wall of moms that were in Portland, that was a great example of somebody becoming an accomplice in a system. So I really believe it's difficult to get Black people to move in these directions because, to be honest, they've been doing it for so long by themselves. And so now people are coming and saying, well, I'll give an example, and I'll finish with this for this question. There was an event that we had at a church that was to help memorialize something that happened and to start galvanizing community support for this initiative. And most of the people that showed up were white. And one of the people that came there said, this is all that you have? Now, the turnout that we had, there were about 30 or 40 Black people, which is generally good on a weeknight. And this person said, is that all that you have? And she was honest in her ask, right? I don't ascribe any negative motives to her. But I said to her, so what you have to understand is that some people are working. Some people have children that they have to watch. They can't just show up to these things. But also you have to remember, Black people have been fighting this battle for hundreds of years. You're just showing up. So we have to be mindful that a lot of the work that has people deflated and dejected is the reason that we get the results that we get. So we do need a jump start, but also we need to be mindful that when we ask people, how do we change something? Our first response can't be, we can't do this because.
Thank you. This question is from Patty. I would like Kerwin to address the laws in place which protect police and make it almost impossible to hold them responsible for crimes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but I'll say at the outset, a lot of these issues and things that we're talking about, they're like threads on a garment. You start pulling at it, and before long, the whole thing is going to fall apart because all of these things are connected and necessary. One of the things that keeps police above the law is the police unions. Allowing unions to dictate policy, allowing unions to control politicians, those are the types of things that keep it above the law. There's a thing, qualified immunity, that allows officials to be shielded from civil lawsuits in the course of their duty. And that, I think, if you take that away and you allow law enforcement officers or the unions or the counties or the towns that they represent to be held civilly responsible for wrongful deaths, I think you'll start to see either the good cops that are there, they'll start telling on the bad cops, or the police unions or the police departments will go bankrupt. I think it's the same thing with the gun manufacturers, right? You cannot sue them because they have somehow had this shield that says no matter what happens, they're not responsible. Well, so let's either do this. Let's either give everybody qualified immunity, or let's give nobody qualified immunity, right? So I think doing that, the unions, qualified immunity, and just politicians in the pockets of organizations, those are the things. And if we can take away those things, then I think you'll have more accountability.
Thank you. A question from Charles. What are the highest priorities to addressing institutional racism and the actions that you and the rest of you can take to achieve your objectives?
Highest priority is education. Educating people on what institutional racism is, right? Letting people know that I am not calling you a racist, but I'm saying that if we follow the letter of these things and the way that they are applied, this is racist. And so we need to know what are the tools to undo or to modify. Education in our schools, education in our homes, because even Black people have internalized white supremacy in their organizations, in their systems. That's the reason that I named it the silent sting, my talk, the silent sting, is because we know about America's history with it, but the fact that there are so many institutions that represent Black people that have adopted policies and practices that are based in white supremacy, we have to start educating ourselves about that and just be ready to do the work of building, creating a new reality for ourselves. So I won't give more than one, because once we start at the education, then the other ones will start to flow. But it's just educating ourselves, educating those people that we're around, educating our institutions.
Thank you. A question from Jerry. As it relates to the Breonna Taylor case, it is hard to indict an individual. How do you indict a department and the process that allowed that raid to happen in our legal system?
How do you indict the department? I don't know that attempting to indict a department or like the entire system head on is the way. I think if I go back to my garment analogy, we have to start pulling it out piece by piece. Those things that are the most egregious, right? So for example, if I had the opportunity to speak with the district attorney there, I would ask, did someone lose their life in this setting? The answer obviously has to be yes. Then my question would be, who is being held responsible for this death? If the answer is no one, then you can say that this is a problem, because there are laws on the books where people have accidentally killed people, but they have been held accountable. Why is it different in this case? And then so if you try to take on the entire system, if you try to bite off too much, then people will always find ways and reasons, things that you didn't do right, to dismiss what you're saying. But if you can focus narrowly in on certain things that are just blatantly and patently egregious, then I think you have a better chance to start making the dominoes fall, and then things start to change. So it's just being very simple and direct so that there's no miscommunication, or it can't be any differing interpretation of what is being alleged or charged.
Thank you. And from Esmet, a statement. Middletown South, where my daughter graduated many years ago, she was one of 3 minorities, one Indian, one Black, and herself, who is, I would say, considered brown. Thank you, Esmet. And from Phil, Dr. Potka is renowned for mathematically orthogonalizing complex systems that are broken to separate out individual faults and fix them? Can we use data and science to detect and fix the faults of injustice that diminish our social systems? Interesting.
Madhav, would you
Jada?
care to take a crack at that one?
Madhav, you are muted.
Of the intersection of social justice and mathematics. Do we have Madhav?
Okay, well, that's a very profound question. I have given no thought to it, but I really believe that science can and should be used to solve social problems. And it's a certainly welcome help for our collaboration if people can have, because I have very little understanding of the social science. So I'll be happy to donate some of my time to do it.
Mm-hmm. From Georgette.
Can I add to that? Can I add to the other one?
Sure. Yeah.
I really believe that you can break down the complex systems and fix it if we have the courage and the will to do so. If enough people decided that this is what we want to do, I definitely believe it can, because it is not, we have to think about it this way. The system was put together, it was built, right? And so it can be unbuilt or it can be modified to change. The challenge that people run into is that once you start modifying or changing things, it starts to encroach upon some people's comfort level or privilege, and that's where the pushback comes. But if people had the will and the desire to do it, I have no doubt that it could be.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like to add something too, I'll call somebody who's a social scientist at heart, but a mathematician by trade. It's important to point out the numbers in some cases, but the numbers without the impact on humans, the human story, you put those two together and you have a compelling argument that people can understand. That's kind of how I've evolved to think about that.
Can I add something too to that?
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting because I just read something for my one history class about how there's this pseudo science in terms of race, and how racism is ingrained in data analytics, especially in terms of demographics, and kind of how 50 or so years ago someone might have done a census kind of data collection of a community to kind of villainize minorities, in the sense of the idea of that they're being intruders into especially in terms of suburban areas, and so just how data and science were used to perpetuate racism, it definitely can be used to kind of fix the faults. And it's a combination of a lot of things that it can be applied to, but statistics and the way that math can kind of better represent the injustices, especially if you think of things like mass incarceration, and how even kind of studying that is underfunded just because it's easier to avoid those issues and not put the numbers out there. It can definitely kind of raise awareness and open some eyes, hopefully, if the right people are behind it, because it also can be manipulated to push the wrong message.
I'll add one more thing. I think the trick is to get to root cause analysis, not just look at the raw numbers, because the raw numbers you can use to explain things wrongly. You got to go, well, why is it that? Why is it that? Why is it that? And you got to get to some of the root causes, which is a challenge. But if you just do this, you can manipulate and make any story you want.
I'd like
I would add
to.
that
One last addition to that. My view in this, if you really want to address this issue in a scientific manner, you have to develop a very accurate mathematical model that should take care of the outliers, the initial conditions, and all the other factors that comes in that you can add it. And that model can be flexible enough that you can add and modify the conditions to get the outcome that is accurate to represent the problem.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this was a rich question.
Yes, yes. Mike Thompson would like to ask a question about education. So I unmute
Hi.
your-
It's actually his wife, Brianna. I know it says his name on it, but I'm actually a school counselor in an urban high school in North Jersey. About 86% of my students are on free reduced lunch. We have a really big immigrant population, primarily Hispanic families. So, this can go hand in hand with the, we were just talking about law and how we make a change. And, Kerwin, you said it best, by piece, that's the only way that we're really going to make a change. But with this education system, I see the faults in it pretty regularly. And without going too much into it, during the pandemic, I have students who were going to work instead of doing their online school because they lost a family member because of, a loss of job in the household. So you're seeing what their home is like changing. So where is the equity? Sure, we got Chromebooks for them the start of this because we're all virtual, but still it doesn't remove the barriers going on at home. So how do we fix this whole, we're teaching them to test, these standardized tests that are not created for people of all socioeconomic status? How do we make it where any student can be successful? And I know it's a loaded question, and these conversations certainly get my mind racing, and again, you have to go back to piece by piece, but I look forward to any suggestions that Kerwin or Jada have. I know, Jada, you talked about history courses, implementing that, which is great to foster creative conversation, but I'm just interested in any other thoughts you may have.
Jada, you want to go first?
Sure. So, one thing that comes to mind with you being a counselor, when I was working over the summer with other students from Middletown North and South about how we can kind of support minority students who might not have the same level of accessibility to some things as other students, we talked about having either a group of administrators or it's hard because you don't want to put too much responsibility on one administrator, and have them be the go-to person, but it is a nice idea to have some sort of representation, because I remember when I had issues with certain things, I didn't necessarily want to talk to my counselor about it, who was a white man, but having it's also hard because you can't necessarily hire more teachers or administrators of color if they're not applying to certain areas, but definitely kind of making the school community as a whole more inviting for not only students but administrators who kind of have the background to help support minority students who are underprivileged is helpful. So it's not necessarily something that can happen very easily, but it's an idea to kind of bring to your administration maybe, and or talk about some type of administrative group, because if no adults, I guess, are supporting those students in a way that's also emotional based, because it is a lot of pressure to have those responsibilities at home, then it could be really difficult for them in their learning process, I guess.
Okay, thank you for that, Jada. Thank you also for the question. It's a really good one. I'd say first thing is to ask yourself the question and think about, and this is for everybody, think about what is the purpose of education, right? Why do we send students to school anyway? And where I've thought about this for a long time, and where I've come down on it is that students are at school for 7, 8 hours a day. Well, you still have a whole bunch of hours that are left that are not in school. And so my thing would be, how do we get educational supports outside of the school? How do we get people, I think, well, let me back up. I think that the purpose of education is to teach people to think, right? I need to teach you to problem solve. I need to teach you to think. And so I can do that outside of the structure of school. I can do that outside of the regular school day that you have. Also, I think, and this is some of the work that I do through Interfaith Neighbors, which I'm employed with through the church, and through other nonprofit organizations that I'm connected with, is become a student of the student. Learn the gifts and talents and the proclivities of this child that you're trying to teach, and then build an educational curriculum around them the best you can. This is probably done outside of school, like through nonprofit community organizations or churches, but you help them to learn and grow in a way that is tailored towards them as much as possible. Because as you said, the school system and the teaching to the test was not designed for certain people anyway. And so forcing a child to try to raise or to come up to this standard that is not natural to them is going to be, it's going to get to a point of diminishing returns. So while I'm not saying abolish the schools as they are, alongside of that, try to find ways for you to help that student discover about themselves and discover ways that they can benefit their family and the community, which may not necessarily be a traditional path. I think about the many students who go to college that should not have gone to college, maybe should have gone into a trade or something like that, or an entrepreneurial path, right? And so find ways to plug people in where they are leaning into their strengths so that you're not causing somebody to go beyond what they can naturally do. So I think it's a reimagining of what the purpose of education is and the way that we can deliver it. And I think that any organization that touches a child or has connections with that child has some responsibility. Also, not only the child, because I think we're like 2 or 3 generations into this structure and a system that weren't designed for certain people. We also have to find a way to educate the parents as well, or the home community, so that we're all learning and growing together as a way to better ourselves, so that we're not so dependent on the system that may or may not be servicing us the best.
Liz, I think we should let Evie intervene at this point.
Oh, yeah, I have a comment to build on that. My entire career and life has been dedicated to innovative education. And Kerwin, I 100% agree with you. However, I don't think what you're talking about needs to take place out of school. I think that is what school should be. Mm-hmm. And I have many, many, many experiences of successful, innovative education. I think this may be not as radical as defunding police, but maybe we can consider defunding, I don't like the word defunding, but reinventing schools. Yeah. And for better or worse, this pandemic is making us do that.
Absolutely.
But I think we need to reinvent what we need. Many people have reinvented it, but I think we need to continue reinventing how we understand education.
Absolutely.
And I'm always available to add anything, at other times.
Can I pick up on Stevie a little bit? I'd like to broaden this discussion a little bit. My own experience, I worked as a teacher. I've worked as a professor, as a scientist, etc. And this particular point which Stevie is making, and which Minister Kerwin has made, this is a broader implication for other issues which Minister Kerwin brought up in his talk, which has to deal with how do we listen to others, How do we listen to someone who doesn't think like me? That's a scientific method. But even the scientists forget that. Even they don't know how somebody who produces some solution to something, which a lot of others don't think it will work, they don't want to listen to him. In my congregation, and I have had multiple congregations, mostly UU congregations, whenever an African-American person joins the congregation, they think differently. They have, but then the people who are part of the congregation, who've been there for a long time, they right away tell them, this is not how things work. They say, this is
not what.
we do things differently here.
Mm-hmm.
And and then even though the person who's entering the congregation is very smart, has a lot of experience, etc., they're not able to go forward with that. So this, I say, is lazy thinking on the part of the majority. And that's a simpler way of saying this. Even we can say this is a racial issue, etc. But it is a broader issue of how we listen to each other.
Thank you, everyone. A comment from Georgette. Jada, growing up in Middletown, was your neighborhood a mix with Blacks and other groups of color? I grew up in Middletown with many people of color, still only had less than 10% graduating from Middletown High School South. Thanks, Georgette. Patty White has a question.
No.
Excellent point by Kerwin for non-Blacks to be accomplices. We can all stand up on behalf
only 10%
and try to blunt or reduce the burden placed on them. You want to say anything about that?
I'd like to add to that question. So one of the objectives that I have is how the Monmouth Center can be an accomplice of existing organization and do it in a way that's effective, because there are a lot of issues of organizations sort of trying to take over. This is the way we should do it. And I don't know if this is a conversation we should have now. You might have some tips. It will be a conversation we will have after today. But if you have any thoughts on how to participate in a way that's helpful, doesn't take over, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, it's almost over.
Okay, thanks. And we have a question from Ellen. Did you want to ask that question?
It probably was my question. I mean, I yield to my wife all the time. Minister Webb, I just want to take up from where I was speaking earlier. I feel that the problem is not with the African Americans. The problem is with the majority. That's my central point, because we talk about systemic racism and so on. Systemic racism is maintained by majority. And if alterations have to take place in our society, it is the majority who has to do that. African Americans are always first forward are asked to raise a lot of hubbub so that they could be heard. But the real thing is that we all need to be hearing. We need to come up with out-of-the-box thinking. Sometimes we, in scientific parlance, we say. How do we develop that out-of-the-box thinking? Not only now, I would say, maybe your congregation is African-American majority. I don't know that. Is that correct? And so are they ready to have some kind of a out-of-box thinking? Is there boxing up on both sides happening?
So yeah, thank you for that. And I do agree that the majority, a lot of the word lies with the majority. But I cannot in good conscience say that Black people don't have some work to do as well. My congregation is African American, predominantly, but we also have some things that hold us back. The out-of-the-box thinking, you have certain people there that try the out-of-the-box thinking, but again, similar to in broader society, because it's difficult, because it's different, because this is not how we've done it before, it gets shut down. And so you have the same type of dynamics at play. And for me, that's even more insidious, because while we understand that outside society, we have this challenge, right? To try to push this boulder up the mountain, right? But then in our own spaces where we should be nurturing and building each other and really supporting and trying innovative out-of-the-box thinking, not all African-American congregations, not all Black people are there. So while, yes, I'll say majority of people, yes, really, we need to embrace and we need to do that, but we have to look at ourselves as well, because we can't just throw up our hands and say the system is against us when we are sometimes perpetuating the system. And as far as out-of-the-box thinking, I would say that people who have out-of-the-box thoughts are in everywhere that we go. It's just a matter of, do we create the culture and the climate for people to feel comfortable to put them forward?
Repeat.
Go ahead.
Repeat, Minister Webb, repeat, please.
So yeah, the majority, I believe, does have responsibility to help change society, but it would be incomplete and incorrect for me to say that all African Americans are doing their part. I have frequented African American spaces, and I have been one of those out-of-the-box thinkers that suggest things, and I get told, no, that's not how we do it. We can't do it this way, for whatever reasons. And so everybody has their roles to play in bringing about this change. And the last thing was that out-of-the-box thinkers are always around us. It's just a matter of if we are creating the climate and the availability for them to put their out-of-the-box ideas on the table without being demeaned or made fun of or just like ostracized for it. So it's just a matter of listening and hearing, and then creating space for people to be able to feel comfortable sharing out-of-the-box thoughts. How do
we get your out-of-box thinkers and this bold's out-of-box thinkers come together and form some kind of a camaraderie so that we can all together do out-of-the-box thinking?
I will say, Joe, if you could connect with me after this, we can definitely arrange something, and I will bring people together, because I do know a lot of out-of-the-box thinkers that are just waiting on outlets. And it's not, let me say this, it's not that people just want to have their ideas just done and implemented, but just at least debated and fashioned and shaped so that they can be implemented, right? If we can create that through the center, Joe, I think that'll be one of the great victories out of this calamity that we're in.
Reverend Rubano, I think you're hearing this.
I am hearing it.
That's right.
I am hearing it.
This is a comment from Connor, our senior, college senior. I'm a senior disaster preparedness and emergency management major at Rowan University. In the United States, there are laws that can indict companies if they cause a technological man-made hazard. Look up the Bhopal disaster. The Indian Supreme Court fined the American country that owns the plant. Thank you, Connor. Oh, okay. We're coming to an end here.
I have something.
As the,
Are there more people, Liz, or?
okay.
Stevie,
I had something, I put it in the chat, but I have something I want to say. I don't know if it got up to me yet.
Why don't you say it?
Oh, okay. Well, this is maybe out of the box. This doesn't just like fit right in. Well, two things. One, Kerwin, I love your idea. And the Monmouth Center for 25 years has been trying to think out of the box. Even our meetings are not like normal meetings. We are always engaged in dialogue. People come to our meetings and say, was that a meeting? So we try to employ, we try to do that. It's not always easy, it's sometimes very difficult. But I have something else I wanted to share from my heart. That is, I bring with me to this meeting somebody who I love in spirit because she's not living amongst us right now. And that's Dr. Margaret Parker. Many people here know her. And I believe she was the first president of the Red Bank NAACP. She's always with me. She's always in my heart. And I know she's smiling at us right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.
I'd like to, this is Harry. One of my responsibilities was to give a 5-minute warning. So Joe, we are 10 minutes into it, and our chat has worked very well. That's why some of the people who raised their hands, they changed it to, because they asked a question. I still have the hand raised by Ismet. Ismet, do you have another question?
Shall we do a closing?
Sorry.
Then?
Okay.
Okay.
It's not a question, it was a comment,
Okay.
and I'm not going to take so much time, but I wanted to touch upon the idea of the standardized testing. For my own experience, when I started working with AT&T, we had a course and they gave us the Myers-Briggs test that put us in boxes, and I came out as extreme introvert, which puzzled the instructor the entire course because you're an extreme extrovert. How did this happen? And we looked at my test results, and it turned out every question in the result that has to do with introvert extrovert relates to a party activity and party behavior. We don't have parties where I come from. So the standardized test puts people exactly in the wrong places if it doesn't take into consideration where they come from and how they are.
Back to you, Joe.
Okay, so let's do a expression of appreciation for Kerwin and Jada.
Thank you, guys.
I would like to say that I'm really pleased that we broke tradition and went with 2 speakers. I think hearing 2 voices on complex issues is just a great thing to do. So I thank for the diverse ideas. Few thank yous to the UU for always supporting the Monmouth Center, to the Monmouth Center Board for helping pull together this program. We work together like a team, and somehow we always figure it out. Everybody helps a little bit, especially the Shanti team. We did this without a whole lot of fuss. It just kind of happened, so great. And of course, a special thank you to the Chada family for participating every year in the Shanti program, and of course for providing the funding for it. Most of all, though, I express appreciation to the audience for your presence and your participation. Take in your heart what you learned today figure out how to do something, learn some more. A few announcements. If you're not already on the Mama Center event invite list, get a hold of me or Liz, provide your email address. You will get invited to maybe 8 to 10 events a year, something like this. And we do not send out, advocacy emails to drown your email box, which you don't need any of those. You may contribute to the Mama Center by going to our website to help us defray the costs of such events. In about a week, this event will be recorded on our website. You'll also find a recording of our last event, which was presented by Ellen Chada, which was the 400 years of African American history, which is really a wonderful program. You could either listen to the video, watch the video, or you could also just find the slides and peruse them on your own. Again, with the objective, learn a little there and then go out and learn some more on your own. Stay tuned for our next event, which is not yet scheduled, but will be a panel discussion on white privilege from 3 different perspectives. That should be, I think, a very interesting one. I envision next year, based on the conversation today, that we should have a program on race, the definition of race, that it's a socially manufactured construct. And if there is a race, there's only one race, and that's the human race. So stay tuned for that next year. We may have a few speakers to help us on that one. We intend to also post on our website a list of some local organizations that have been working on race relations and racial injustice for years. I'll just name a few. Again, the NAACP of Red Bank, which Kerwin is the president. And if you're not aware, the Red Bank Library has a program that they've been doing for 5 years called Let's Talk About Race. It's typically a monthly program, which is now on Zoom, where you can learn a lot. And the website that they have is just super rich for information. We have learned a lot from them. We may want to replicate that program elsewhere. And if you're not aware of the online Stand Up for the Pledge, which I helped create as part of the New Jersey Interfaith Coalition, which you can find at njifc.org, it's a pledge that each of us can sign to address fighting religious and ethnic intolerance. Recently, we came together to update it to explicitly focus on racial intolerance. Let me paraphrase. While interacting within my own circles, your churches, your family, your friends, your work, if you hear disparaging comments from anyone about members of any other community, pledge to stand up for the other and challenge bigotry in any form. So basically, where you're in your community, where it's comfortable for you to speak, that's a good place to speak. Does anyone else have any announcements that they would like to make? Kerwin, Jada?
Thank you everyone for having such a wonderful discussion. I really learned a lot too, and I hope you guys learned something too from me.
Amen. Okay.
Thank you all for your questions. Thank you for your attention and being here. I would say find out about the organizations in your areas that are doing the important work. If you can support them financially, do that, because to get word out, to host events like this, it really takes some effort. But just continue to be a part of the conversation. Don't allow this to be a one-off thing. Be that person that brings awareness to the culture, to the places that you are. Change the atmosphere when you go there, and then people will start to change around you. Thank you again. It was a great event. I learned a lot, and I'm glad that we will be continuing to do different work in the future, because it's a lot ahead of us.
So hopefully next year we will again have our Shanti event live, so we can have a conversation and a meal together. And more importantly, hopefully in a year, we'll see some substantial progress in the United States relative to two long-standing epidemics, the epidemic of COVID and the epidemic of racism. So with that, I say peace and Shanti to everyone. And until next time, there will be a next time.
Joe, I just want to say, let's all go vote, everybody. Everybody go and vote. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Very inspiring. Very inspiring.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, it's working. All right. Peace.
Voilà. Namaste.
Yeah, Peter worked perfectly.
Yes, yes. This was wonderful. Wow. But there's one thing. I was doing the chat, and the chat was the whole, I didn't see anybody. I
Oh,
just sure saw the chat, and then on the outside, I had, the speaker. So I didn't see hands up. So we have to figure that one out.
I saw hands up, but some of them changed to chat.
yeah, okay. Well, good. The audience responded to the reality, which is good.
For example, Jerry Godbear had hands up, but then he asked the question. So I think Ismet had her hand up. Only 3-4 people have the hands up.
Well, the chat worked well. Liz, on my screen, I can look at the chat and I still see the speaker. So, there are subtleties.
Speaker. I saw the speaker, but I couldn't, I guess I should have put on the other view.
Gallery
But
view? Okay.
it covered most of my screen, so I couldn't see.
You should be able to shape the size of it, I think,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure.
Well,
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Like when you speak, I can see the whole screen full of you. Now, when I speak, do you see the same thing?
Yes.
Okay, so it's the other people who see the whole picture.
Yes.
I guess.
Yes.
Window.
Yes.
I guess I should stop recording now. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
All right.